What's up, Zach here, and today I've got the all-new Adidas Adizero Select 2.0, and as I'm looking at this right now, it is just very evident that somebody somewhere insulted the mothers of, I think, everybody in Adidas Basketball's R&D department, because those designers came out swinging. There is so much under the hood of this shoe that is honestly a really interesting blueprint for the rest of Adidas Basketball going forward. So let's get into it. Now, starting off in the uppers, I think this is really where I would like to see a lot of other companies start going. Number one in the heel counter, I know I don't usually start in the heel counter, but it's 5 layers of foam in there. Now they are thinner layers of foam, but all stacked on top of each other. It makes a really sculpted ankle collar. Now, the ankle collar is pretty low there, and the fact that it is a little bit flat here in the more proximal aspect of the ankle collar, it does have some padding underneath of it as well. That actually might be a 6th layer, I'm not sure. But there still is a tad bit of heel slippage until you break them in. If you're a low volume ankle, you're gonna get some slippage. Other people aren't, like I said, once you break the shoe in. But then as you go into the tongue of the shoe, you get another 3 layers of padding and then little pods of padding as you go down the tongue. Now, when we look at the breathability test in a second, you would think these things would heat up like crazy with all that padding, but when you get to the rest of the upper is this paneled mesh. As you can see on the outside, you can see the 2 different colors, right? The green and the orange. But when you look at it under the microscope, you can see even though the meshing is tiny, it is pretty chunky and substantial. However, when you flip the shoe over and look underneath of it, that is actually stitched from underneath with a block stitch as well. So that all integrates with each other. So for how light the uppers are, right, and how more minimal they are, there is so much reinforcement just from where they put the stitching, right? It's almost like, you know, before skyscrapers, people thought, well, I can only take up this much real estate with a building, until people thought to go up, right? You know, when they started making buildings with steel. Whereas in basketball shoes, you think, well, you can only put so much foxing on the outside of a shoe. Well, Adidas just said, well, why don't we just reinforce it from underneath? And so this is just 1 layer of stitching, but where they put the stitching and where they've reinforced it allowed them to make a ridiculously strong upper while making it still really breathable. On the breathability test, these things only heated up 105.3 degrees. And then I think the more impressive thing is you look at the breathability mapping of it, and air is flowing out all the way to the distal forefoot, like all the way into the toe box. You are seeing a lot of fog coming out of these. So they're not holding on to heat, they're not holding on to moisture, even with all the bunting and padding. But what I really love about that is when you get to the lace line, that's where you get 2 layers of reinforcement there. So the lace line is still really strong. The laces in these are actually really wimpy. So I probably, if you're trying to get a good lockdown, I would replace those. But everything that is attached to the shoe and the uppers is an absolute beast. What is not the strongest thing in the world though is its resistance to abrasion. On the upper durability test, 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper. I mean, this drag guard is just felt, and so it's more meant for indoor courts, and we'll talk about that when we talk about the outsole tread. But I was even starting to work through the light strike on the outside of it, or on the medial side of the shoe here, just from dragging and sliding my foot on indoor courts. So the durability on these, to blunt trauma, to containment in the uppers, is outsized for the profile of the shoe and for what they are. But if you're dragging and sliding on anything gritty, get ready for these to look pretty weird. But getting into the midsole teardown, this is an entire bed of Light Strike foam. I'm starting to think Light Strike is more of an idea than it is a product, because it just seems to constantly change. There's always a different formulation, it always feels different underfoot to me. I think this one also feels a little bit different because of the ridiculously long top-loaded shank though in these. This is what I was hoping for from Adidas tennis. You know, getting one that starts mid part of the heel and then goes almost to the junction of the mid and forefoot. This thing is an absolute beast. And so this foam is pretty low to the ground, right? You are getting a low stack of foam, much like a lot of Adidas tennis shoes are, but with that long of a shank, at least that Light Strike is gonna be protected for all. Because remember, Light Strike is not the most durable foam to real shock-induced trauma, right? Now, if you look at that on the bounce height test, got 29 centimeters in the heel, then 30 in the forefoot, which is right around where Light Strike normally gets. To me, Light Strike is not a real explosive type foam. It's much more of a foam for ground feel, ground contact, just being able to kind of give yourself a lot of tactile sensation. You can really feel the court through that foam. What I liked about this though is you see these big macro cutouts here right in the midfoot, and you have some more break points here in the forefoot, but the way this shoe bends, right, when you're pivoting on the court or when you're taking off in these, you do get a real outsized feeling of grip and feel on these that you don't get from some other shoes. Not from the materials, but just how the materials are implemented. And that design like perfectly ties right into the outsole tread. So what I'm talking about is, you got these break points here in the midsole, which allow bending and grip, but then we look at the outsole tread, it is a full-length tread pattern. You can see those break points here from the outside of the shoe. Then you've got basically these flanges of rubber that go in a wave pattern all throughout the shoe. These flanges open up, right, into a little bit of a depth there. The thing is when those flanges contact the ground, they create almost like an octopus's suction cup, right, except they're not circular. So when you're contacting the ground, especially when you're bending the shoe, that's when you get the outsized grip, right? When you're pivoting really hard, when you're getting low to the ground, when you're trying to hit those hezzy steps, things like that. On the grip test ramp, they still didn't slip till 43 degrees, so the inherent grip in the rubber is decent enough, but it's the functional grip in them that I think is really crazy. I really like in the rear foot of these how it's basically just a cat track pattern back here. I mean, that I really liked that. I thought you could really feel that engaging when you're trying to stop going north to south or anterior posterior on the court. But wrapping up how the midsole and the outsole interact, if you look at the speed ratio on these, coming in at a 2.27, shank score of 0.3, top loaded, presence of a shank, crosses a zone, brings it up to a 2.57. And I think, I think that's maybe overselling it a tad. These things, their speed and their ease of speed comes from the fact that they're pretty bottom light shoes with a pretty long shank that gives you a little bit of a diving board effect, and then they basically just get out of your way, right? The Light Strike's not gonna really do anything in terms of feeling explosive or feelings of launch. The shank is though, I mean that shank is fantastic. But to me, with the weight of these, the profile of them, how the shank interacts, the bottom light feeling, that's where you're gonna get the speed. Going north to south in these does not feel super easy gliding, right? It's fine, it's not elite by any means. Getting up off the ground in these, for first step launch or trying to get up for a layup or a dunk, not that I'm doing any dunking, but that doesn't feel as explosive as other shoes. So it's mainly the fact that the shoe is not feeling like it's weighing you down more than anything. We are getting either the perceived or real speed out of these. All right, but getting into the fit, I actually had to make a bunch of notes on these because of what I was feeling them on court versus their measurements here. It's a little bit of a Jekyll and Hyde on these. So number one, the length is pretty true to size, right? The width is pretty forgiving at 9.2 centimeters for my men's size 11 foot. So the thing is though, is that the shoe inflares 10 degrees, right? And I'm gonna start to be putting the actual degrees of inflare, or the actual shape of the last in the videos, as well as on the Google Sheet, which I'll have in the description if you wanna check that out to be able to compare all the shoes. But what I noticed is because these, they don't really look like they're that inflared just to the eye, but when you actually put the measurement on them, they are. The toe box in them also has a lot of room laterally. So you got a pretty generous fitting forefoot with a pretty generous inflare. That means you're gonna have a lot of extra room in the forefoot, which means the shoe is it's not going to fill the feet of a lot of people. So if you're a narrow or medium foot on these, I probably would be going down a half size unless you are super long toed. A 2E, I'd probably just be going true to size. In a 4E, if you go up 1/2 size on these, I'd maybe try to fit these. You might have some cramping and break-in. This one to me was a little bit of a weird fit just because there just seemed to be so much more room in the forefoot versus other shoes that I thought it was, a shoe that had a little bit more length. It doesn't. And so when you're kind of stopping, right, your foot starts to go forward in the shoe. So that can lead to bloody toenails, cracked toenails, things like that. As long as you put a pad under the tongue, I mean, it stops it fine. It's not a huge deal, but it's just something you got to think about. In terms of the snake bitten foot, You know, for a really low to the ground shoe in terms of arch pain, I think they're okay just because the shank is so robust. The Light Strike though, like I said, it allows you to communicate with the ground a lot, and that the feeling of communication to the ground, it makes you feel like you have a really intimate contact, but it's definitely not going to be the best for forefoot pain, heel pain, anything shock-induced tendonitis, things like that. So with a very low profile orthotic in there, I think it's okay. With the slippage concerns on these, if you're going up sizes, up half sizes, or you know, these aren't broken in enough, I would say these definitely are meant for people that don't have as many snake bites on their foot, especially in the Adidas basketball lineup. There are better if your foot is suffering from something else. But getting into the all-important playability of the 2.0s, I thought these were a very interesting shoe around the perimeter. Right? I thought these shoes were very interesting in terms of the grip they gave you when you're trying to come to a dead stop, you know, from a little bit more of a high-speed situation. I thought they were incredibly nimble when you were just trying to move around the court, right? Trying to create some space. The one thing though is, like, when you're trying to do a step back, right, or a side step and actually trying to pop off the ground, you definitely feel a little bit dead or dull. You definitely got to bring that yourself. The thing is though, is when you are kind of trying to get low to the ground or using different parts of the shoe, or when you're off balance, off axis, that's where these shoes really come to life, right? It's the grip and just the ability for these to bend in the right spots and for them to stay stable in the right spots where that shank is, and the feeling that you get through that Light Strike, and because they are lower to the ground with those flanges of rubber. So for a shoe for really intimate feel, right? If you're someone that likes that really nice tactile feel of a shoe, and you're someone that can bring a little more of the explosiveness to the court, then I think these are really great. And especially if you can get these shoes one-to-one with your foot, that's where I think these do their best work, because if you're swimming in them a little bit, the containment is all off, right? You can't use any of the tools in the uppers here with the stitching or any of the reinforcement or the shape or anything like that. So I think the playability in these is tied to the fit so much in these versus maybe some other shoes. So I think if you're the right foot type, the right player, you're gonna find so much easy feel in these. Just don't expect to find easy bounce, easy launch, or feelings of explosiveness in this shoe. If you want that, get something with Jet Boost. So I'd love to hear your thoughts in these in the comments down below. Are you picking up a pair of these? Are you going for something else? Do you like the profile? Let me know down below. And if you want to see what I'm talking about, the differences between Light Strike and something with Jet Boost in it, the Adidas AE1 going to the knife, make sure you click into this video up above and subscribe down below. Respect your rubber and foam. I'll see you somewhere in the Sneakerverse.